Thank you for coming today. We're really excited at the discussion points we're going to have. My name is Matthew Chesney. I'm Director of Backlit, which is an artist-led space in the east side of the city. And we're here today with Simon Starling, Turner Prize winning artist, and we're also joined by Daniel Brown, who's Astronomy Lecturer here at NTU at the Clifton campus. The talk's beyond space, physics and motion studies and contemporary art. So we're going to be kind of weaving Simon's practice around these different areas. Have there be some interesting discussion, and towards the end you can ask some questions. But if we could start with a bit of an idea of the process of making for you.
One of the reasons we're kind of here today is I guess to talk about the film that is showing at Backlit, and maybe that's a kind of good example of the way that I think about making, and it's kind of very, I suppose, very typical of the way that I've approached making work over the years. This sort of sense of intrigue in the way that things are produced, both on a kind of level of a physical level. You know, how do the things that we use day to day, how do they get made? What are the sort of decisions? What are the materials? Where do those materials come from? All of those kinds of aspects of being things that have sort of fed into the way that I've developed a sort of, I don't know, a language for making art on a sort of historical level. How are stories told? How does history get written and so on? And I think the Black Drop film is a very good example of that kind of interest. When I was invited to think about the transit of Venus and the observations of the transit of Venus, for me it kind of connected to that sort of process of working and mapping this idea that, you know, in the 18th and 19th century people were sent out around the world to observe the same event from different spots, and in order to be able to kind of triangulate the astronomical unit was kind of fascinating and connected very immediately with a kind of way of working and thinking. You know, there was the connection to early photography and cinematography immediately through Jules Janssen, this kind of very pioneering French astronomer who was famous for using photography, you know, in the service of science, and so on and so on. So it grew in a very sort of natural way, the project. And then I just sort of, in a way, I just sort of applied my usual logic to the, you know, going to the source. And in this case, the source was this 4,000 meter high volcano in Hawaii, Mauna Kea, which has extremely clear skies and made a perfect spot for, which is why they built all those things up there. But it was made a perfect spot for observing the transit. And it also, of course, again, it also connected to other things. The story of Captain Cook, who died in Hawaii, also was an attraction. And I went to film at the beach where he was killed, and also went subsequently to Tahiti as well to film the black sand beach where Captain Cook made the observations of the transit of Venus in the pre-photographic days.
So there's a lot of political dimension there as well, because I mean at that time quite imperialistic how we went out, colonial, so one went out to these islands to ignore whoever lived there and then just built whatever one needed to do the
you made
imaging.
A fort and you kind of you bunkered down and you got on with it. But of course, and the other political aspect of it was, in a way, it's clear that the British were using the transit of Venus observations as an excuse, you know, to go further and to discover Australia. And you know, the story is that Captain Cook had this little envelope with him, and he wasn't allowed to open it till he got to Tahiti. And it was instructions to go to discover Terra Australis Incognita. I mean, so somehow because there were all these other countries who had interests in Tahiti and stuff, they were using that as a little bit of an alibi, I think, for their more imperialist aspirations. The film is kind of very much preoccupied with this notion that what Janssen did with his chronophotographic device was in a way a stepping stone towards moving image. And of course there's an irony in that, because what he was trying to do was completely the opposite. He was trying to freeze time at a prescribed moment so that he could then make a retrospective, more accurate calculation of the and it never really worked, which is also interesting. So it's somehow this flawed piece of science kind of then morphed into what Etienne Jules Marais did with his photographic revolver, and then the Lumiere brothers. And the interesting thing is these people were all colleagues. In France, that's that thing about early photography. They're all the world of science and the world of visual arts and things. It's all messed up. It's a big sort of melting pot, and the great difficulty was with making this calculation for an accurate calculation of the distance between the Earth and the Sun through triangulation, was that they were doing it by making observations with the eye through a telescope, and as the observations that Captain Cook made in the 18th century testify, it was very, very difficult to make an accurate assessment of when that contact happened and when it ended, because you're looking through a telescope which has its own limitations. You're trying to you have a clock and so on and so on, but it's tough to do that in a way that's accurate enough.
What was the experience like for you in terms of observing this?
It was to be honest, it was a very, very strange kind of day. We started up there, at 2 a.m. when it was dark. It's very easy, you drive up, but you have to wait a while because you have to get a little bit acclimatized to the altitude. So at 2,000 meters you stop for a few hours, and then we headed on up, and in time to be able to that you use something called an equatorial mount, which is a device that automatically moves the telescope in relation to the movement of the sun, and that requires setting the equatorial mount in relation to the North Star as a kind of constant, and then the sun comes up, and you start to feel very strange, because your body's not really used to being at 4,000 meters. Everything you pick up weighs twice as much as it should do. And I didn't feel like it was really my place in a way up there. I felt quite weird, and Annette, who was working with me on the film, she got quite sick afterwards coming down, and so it's a very, very physical experience to be up there. When you've seen these illustrations, etchings that were made in the already, I think in the 17th century, they'd made a prediction of the exact moment when that little black dot was going to hit the edge of the sun in 2012.
Wow.
And then you're looking at your watch and it arrives bang on time, to the second. And that's really, it's kind of breathtaking in a way.
Would you describe your experience up there with what you're sort of saying here as nearly liminal, sort of otherworldly, just given the kind of...
It was a kind of bit of a out-of-body experience in a way. You're very much in your body, because your body is really not... But it felt afterwards like a kind of dream or something. I think that's the only way I can really describe it.
But essentially, it's, from your impression, it's the journey up there, the travel up there, that probably triggered that quite strongly.
Yeah, I think so. It was incredibly windy, and that caused all sorts of problems for this big lens that we had, and it was like endless, and you're just problem solving the whole time and trying to get through it. And so these kind of perhaps some of these sort of feelings that you have now are in a way projections, because there is so much about getting the job done and being, because I had it cost a lot of money to go there and get up the hill and organise all the equipment, and it kind of had to work, It was like. But
now I'm just harking on that because it strikes me quite a lot what I've encountered before, and sort of the 3 phases of ritual, as you would set it up, because you would have the approach and sort of the introduction into that area, which is a travel towards, which is similar to that experience going up, anticipation, the build-up. Then in the actual ritual, in the site itself, you would have some kind of liminal experience, something out-of-bodily, something that you might say puts you in touch with something sublime, something there. And then the third one, where you remove back down, where you're feeling sort of it's now past and into this. But it's sort of, that's a bit where that's creates some kind of transformative change in you as well as an observer. I mean, which it's rooted it's initially quite temporary, but as you're saying, with the filming continuing on, it probably takes on a longer life.
You can also really understand why that place, Mauna Kea, was a traditional site for rituals, you know, because it's all there. The sort of dramaturgy of that is there, you know, the climb and then this kind of strange, out-of-body sense, and then the descent. It makes so much sense that Aboriginal people used that site as a place to worship. Yeah, it had a real resonance in relation to what we were doing up there. Absolutely.
For those of you that haven't seen Black Drop, it's at Backlit at the moment. It's an incredible film. And Peter Capaldi, people talk about every time they come in, they always ask who it is.
Yeah, that was a strange experience to... I sort of found Peter Capaldi through a friend of a friend who's a filmmaker, and he put me onto his casting agent that he used in London, and she said to me, I just met Peter Capaldi, maybe he's the right person for this thing. And so I sent him the script, and he agreed to do it. And I knew Peter Capaldi from, he actually went to the same art school as me, Glasgow School of Art. He was there. When he arrived to do the filming, he was obviously extremely excited. He'd come from some meeting, and he said, I can't tell you what it is, but it's quite exciting. And then 2 days later it was announced that he was going to be the new Doctor Who. And it was just, it was somehow the perfect, to have Doctor Who narrating this story about time and space, and, it was, it couldn't have been better.
No, it's incredible. It's even more enjoyable. And just in terms of, whilst the exhibition has been on, we've had this transit of Mercury, which has been quite a strange coincidence. Do you want to give me a little outline on that?
Well, 9th of May, you've seen some of the images, some of you, some others might have heard me talk about that before. Essentially, it's very similar from the geometry as what you experienced, apart from it's a different planet. So it's not Venus crossing the front of the Sun, it's Mercury. So as an effect, what that resulted in is a much smaller disk crossing the Sun. And it took roughly from around midday till 7 p.m, so a good half a day for Mercury to cross that disk. And what that actually means geometry-wise in the solar system, you've got the Sun, you've got Earth, and Mercury is just exactly in the middle. And as it crosses, what you're actually seeing is a nicely in-scene setting of mechanics. So as a little boy or girl, when you set up your little solar system, if you have something and it turns around and you see how things move, what you're seeing here is the thing coming alive. You're actually seeing the solar system in motion as it moves across. And very similar, you could, if you wanted to, send out friends to different corners of the of Earth that sees it, and do a similar kind of determination of
why was it that Venus became more important for that? Because Mercury happens more often. Why did they use Venus to?
I think the problem there is I had the calculations for the event I did on Mercury, is the effect. If you imagine the parallax effect, as we say, if you are at the top and the bottom of the Earth looking at Mercury, the angle that it sort of seemingly moves is much smaller compared to, it's still measurable for our cameras. We could now get images from Brazil or so and compare what's happened there, but it's far clearer for Venus, and the idea was not to get a rough idea of the astronomical unit, but a very, very precise idea. That's why that's normally used, and it's much easier to get that as well for the first and second contacts when it actually crosses the disk, which is much easier, bearing the problem in mind that we've got the black drop effect that's sticking to to as well.
We'll just talk about 9 feet later, which is also alongside Black Drop at Backlit. Again, in terms of that migrations of time and space, and there's something you mentioned about phonetic maps of time and layers of transparent maps that have meeting points. I know it's kind of one of the things you mentioned in passing, but I thought was really interesting in terms of, again, that perspective of time and how that can shift throughout one's lifetime or through experience.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I didn't make that work to show next to the Black Drop film, but it suddenly sort of made sense, I think, once I made it. Of course, it has a telescope housing as a sort of one of the major components of it, so there is already a kind of a direct link there. But it's kind of a work that's about trying to sort of establish a kind of sculptural toolkit or something, a sort of set of possibilities in a way. I mean, there's another work that I made a little bit before it, which takes 3 different objects and applies the logic of one to the other. So it's a kind of conversation between 3 things. So there's this little bar of silver, 500 grams of silver. There was again a piece of veneer with a bamboo painting on it, and then there was a bike frame, aluminium bike frame. So what I did was I cut the aluminium bike frame so it weighed 500 grams, and then suddenly it became like a branch or something. And then I stretched the piece of silver until it was as long as the piece of veneer, 9 feet long, and so you have these sort of this conversation between these 3 very different things. And I suppose this was a sort of extension of that, but sort of thinking much more about a sort of temporal aspect, time and the sort of I mean, I've talked about it as being the sort of a kind of a sort of toolkit for building some kind of a time machine, I suppose. But I mean, it's a flimsy notion in a way. But it was just a very it's a very simple kind of sculptural thing, I think, about in a way looking a little bit beyond the appearance of things and thinking about
So what was your idea then behind including the fossilized tree trunks in there?
Well, they're hugely old, I guess, and they have. I mean,
do you have just for the visitors? How old is old?
Well, they're I mean, in terms of the universe, they're not so old, but they're probably I think about 40 million years old or something like that. So a good age.
Older than some of the most massive stars that only get a handful of million years. Old.
So old. They're old material, and also for me there's a sort of something about the relationship between this fossilized wood is a kind of it's a kind of casting process that's going on under the ground. When a tree rots underground, it's been coated in soil and earth and then the thing rots and it makes a kind of cavity, and that fills up with what becomes stone, and it's like bronze casting or something, but it takes a long time. And to me that had a nice relationship to the idea of making this branch with a 3D printing machine, that's layered one layer after the other, boom boom boom. It took I can't remember exactly how many hours, but there were all these just little gentle conversations going on between those. And then you had the zigzag chair, 9 feet of zigzag chair, which is made from this bogwood from which came from New Zealand, which is also very old, which is a kind of pickled wood, which is a kind of stage before it would become coal or oil or what have you. So there's these sort of it's a thing that sort of pushes and pulls you, and the zigzag chair for me is a sort of still has this sort of futuristic sense to it as an object. It's sort of aspirational. It's heading into the future, so it's just about making, and then a telescope housing, a sort of very Victorian looking thing that that sees into the past, and made from oak that's probably 150 years old itself. So there's lots of different sort of.
When I was seeing it, it was quite nice where it's located in backlit, in front of the fairly big, large windows.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed by the plays of light and shadow that bring a whole new dimension to objects as well.
No, it's good there, I think, in backlit. It has a.
I mean, it fell onto the fossilized tree quite nicely.
Yeah.
At that point, that's where I sort of got my way into this. Is always every viewer has their own way in engaging. There's always a different way of contacting the actual idea. And here, for me, the time was seeing the million-year-old tree there, and that was formed and grown through the interaction with the light. So you're looking at light, but the light that's falling on there has only taken 8 minutes or so to travel from the sun to here.
Yeah.
But actually, if you're thinking about, no, that's not come from the surface. So actually, the light that's being created in the center of the star, where the fusion happens, where the energy is created, that takes you 4,000 years, that light to bounce around randomly in the sun until it actually gets to the surface, to actually leave. So at that point, you're thinking, hang on, so this is actually illuminated by light that took 8 minutes to get here, but actually 4,000 years to get out of the sun, which is minute compared to the distant sun Earth.
Yeah.
And at that point you can think about, okay, that's quite fascinating, because you've now got some loads of different time scales playing here, but actually you've also got then the lifetime of the tree fossilized in the ring structure.
Yeah. The arts and science being very good at sort of throwing themselves into question the whole time. This idea that today Hubble has whatever it's announced that Hubble has produced evidence that the universe is expanding 9% faster than we thought it was. I mean, it's like this kind of these sort of technological steps forward, which from Janssen and his chronophotographic device and to Hubble, and in a way the irony of it all is that somehow the more you image, the more you are able to image, the less you seem to know, or something. That knowledge is so contingent and partial and all the time, and it's an ongoing thing, and I love that idea in relation to what I do as an artist as well, I suppose.
Have a round of applause for Simon.